50 women, and Jang Hyuk had not looked at a single one. He moved through the grand marble corridor of the Seo estate like a man walking through smoke, present but untouchable. The hall stretched before him in cold white stone and chandelier light, flanked by rows of Seoul's most sought-after women in gowns that probably cost more than this city's average annual salary. Ivory silk, blush chiffon, navy-beaded lace that caught the overhead light and scattered it like broken stars across the floor. They had all been invited for the same reason, though no one said it aloud. The Jang family was evaluating alliances, and alliances, in their world, came wrapped in beauty and sealed with obedience. Each woman bowed as he passed, deep, practiced, perfectly timed, the kind of bow that had been rehearsed in mirrors, coached by mothers, calibrated to communicate just the right combination of deference and elegance. 50 bows, 50 curved spines, 50 pairs of eyes pointed respectfully at polished black and white marble. Jang Hyuk, 29, head of the Jang Crime Syndicate, the organization that controlled half of Seoul's underground economy, 3 port authorities, and a private security empire that governments quietly contracted, walked past every single one of them without breaking stride. His suit was black, custom, the kind of fabric that didn't crease, no matter how long the day ran. His black hair was swept back with the precision of someone who understood that appearance was armor. Tattoos crawled up the side of his neck and disappeared behind his jaw. A serpent mid-coil, inked at 17 after his first real test of loyalty. His hands were the same, knuckles marked with old decisions, but the rest of him immaculate, controlled, expensive. He had a face that made people feel watched, even when he wasn't looking at them. His head of security, Min Jun, walked 2 steps behind and slightly left, keeping count the way he always did at these events, quietly cataloging reactions, exits, and threats. Tonight, he was also cataloging something else. "That's 47, Min Jun murmured. Jang Hyuk said nothing. He never did. He didn't feel boredom exactly. Boredom implied he had once felt something here that had gone cold. What he felt was more like distance, the kind that builds when a man has spent too many years watching people perform emotions they don't own. Every woman in this corridor wanted something from him. He could see it in the angle of their bows, hear it in the silence they wore like perfume. They weren't afraid of him. Not really. They were afraid of losing access to him. That was a different thing entirely. He was almost at the end of the corridor, already planning which conversation to have first with his uncle, already calculating how quickly he could exit, when Min Jun went quiet in a way that meant something had changed. Jang Hyuk slowed. At the far end of the marble hall, half shadowed by the arch of a doorway, a woman in a maid's uniform was moving with quiet efficiency through the event space, adjusting a tray of crystal glasses on a side table. Her uniform was immaculate, black dress, white apron with neat frilled edges, white headpiece set just above her natural hair. She moved with the kind of posture that wasn't trained. It was just hers, back straight, chin level, movements deliberate but unhurried, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing and needed no one to confirm it. He noticed her because she was the only person in the room not performing. Then he walked closer, and she looked up. Their eyes met, and she did not bow. The room didn't gasp. It went still in a way that was somehow louder than sound. The women nearest to them, mid-bow themselves, seemed to feel it, that strange shift in the air, and a few glanced sideways without lifting their heads. The maid held his gaze, not defiantly, not with challenge in her eyes, just steadily, the way a person looks at another person, not at a title, not at a legend, not at a name that made grown men lower their eyes and lower their voices. At him. Jang Hyuk stopped walking. In 12 years of running the syndicate, no one had ever looked at him quite like that. Like his power was simply not relevant to her. Not because she didn't know it, but because it had nothing to do with what she was doing. She broke eye contact first, returning to her work without ceremony, as if the most feared man in the room was simply a man who had passed by. Min Jun leaned in. "Sir, find out her name." The words came out quiet, certain, the same tone he used when he'd made a decision that wasn't open to discussion. Min Jun paused. "The maid?" Her name, Minjun. Tonight. He resumed walking, but something had shifted. Something small and tectonic, the way a single crack changes the structure of a wall without anyone seeing it yet. The 50 women in their silk gowns blurred back into background. His uncle's conversation waited at the end of the hall. But Jang Hyuk's mind stayed behind, on a woman in a white apron who had not bowed, and somehow, in not bowing, had made him stop for the first time in years. Her name was Clarissa, and she had no idea she'd just walked into the most dangerous story of her life. The CEO estate had a way of making people forget the world existed outside its walls. That was by design. Everything about the venue had been curated to suspend reality. The soaring marble columns that lined the main hall like sentinels, the hand-painted ceiling panels depicting old Korean dynastic scenes in gold and muted crimson. The string quartet positioned near the east wing playing music soft enough to feel like atmosphere rather than sound. Waitstaff glided between guests with the silence of people trained to be invisible. Conversations happened in lowered voices, because in rooms like this, being overheard was its own kind of vulnerability. The gathering wasn't advertised as what it was. The official invitation described it as a private cultural evening hosted by the Seo Family Foundation, a celebration of heritage and philanthropy. There were donations collected at the door, a gallery of traditional artifacts along the West Corridor, a keynote speaker scheduled for 9 o'clock that no one would actually listen to. But everyone present understood the real architecture of the evening. The Jang Syndicate was here, and when the Jang Syndicate appeared at a social event, the social event became something else entirely. 43 families had sent representatives. 11 of those families had sent daughters. The remaining invitees were business partners, political allies, and a carefully vetted selection of Seoul's cultural elite. People whose presence added legitimacy the way expensive framing adds value to art. They dressed for it. They rehearsed for it. They arrived in cars that cost more than most people's apartments and smiled at each other with the practiced warmth of individuals who had learned long ago that genuine feeling was a luxury the powerful couldn't always afford. Jang Hyuk arrived at 8:14, 16 minutes late, which was not carelessness. It was choreography. A man who arrives precisely on time is eager. A man who arrives late without apology has already decided the room belongs to him. He came through the main entrance with 4 members of his security detail flanking him at measured distance, close enough to respond, far enough to be deniable. Minjun walked at his right shoulder, tablet in hand, murmuring the last of the evening's briefing in a low, efficient stream. Who was present? What they wanted? What they would pretend they wanted? The 3 families currently competing for a shipping contract. The politician in the far corner, whose campaign debts had recently become the syndicate's leverage. The woman in the emerald gown near the champagne table, whose father owed Jang Hyuk a conversation that had been avoided for 2 months. Jang Hyuk absorbed it all with the expression of a man reviewing inventory. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray without looking at it. The suit he wore was charcoal so deep it read as black under the chandelier light, cut in the way that made his frame seem less like clothing and more like architecture. The tattoo at his neck, the serpent, its coiled body disappearing beneath his collar, was the only visible disruption to an otherwise immaculate presentation. His dark eyes moved across the room with the kind of calm that was not relaxation. It was assessment. The difference between a man who had never been in danger and a man who had survived enough of it to stop fearing it. He noted exits. He noted faces. He noted who looked at him and who pretended not to. The women positioned along the main corridor noticed him the way a compass notices north. Immediately, completely, with the full weight of their attention swinging in his direction. They had been placed there, most of them, in the way one places flowers in a room, arranged, beautiful, meant to be seen and to create a particular impression. Their gowns were a spectrum of careful choices, white for purity, deep jewel tones for confidence, blush for approachability, black for ambition. Their hair was pinned and perfected. Their posture had been considered. And when Jang Hyuk moved through the corridor, they bowed. one after another, a ripple of deference moving through the hall like a slow wave. Some bows were deep and deliberate, the kind that came from upbringing. Some were shallower, calculated to suggest respect without full submission. All of them were performed. That was the word that kept forming in the back of his mind. Performed. Like every woman in the room had received a script and rehearsed her particular version of what deference to power should look like. He walked past them, all of them. His expression didn't shift, his pace didn't slow. Minjun was still talking, something about the keynote speaker and whether the evening's timeline would hold, and Jang Hyuk was already thinking about the conversation he needed to have with his uncle before 10 o'clock, already building the argument in his head, already 3 steps ahead of where his feet were. And then something made him slow. Not a sound. Not a movement. Something more like the absence of something expected. He was near the archway that opened into the secondary reception room, and his peripheral vision caught her before his conscious mind registered why. A woman at the side table to his left, adjusting a display of crystal glassware with focused, unhurried precision. Her uniform set her apart from every other person in the room. Black dress, white frilled apron, a white headpiece sitting neatly above dark natural hair pulled back and pinned. She was not part of the gallery of arranged women. She was working, moving with the quiet competence of someone whose job was to make the evening function invisibly. She looked up. Their eyes met over the rim of a champagne flute, and she did not bow. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds, maybe 3. Her gaze was direct and entirely uncalculated, the look of someone who had simply registered another person in the room. Not a title. Not a reputation that made security teams nervous and politicians careful. Just another person, in her line of sight briefly, before she returned her attention to the glasses she was arranging. As if he had not fundamentally altered every room he'd entered for the last 6 years. As if the name Jang Hyuk was simply a name. He stopped walking. Minjun noticed immediately and fell silent mid-sentence. Jang Hyuk stood still in the archway for a moment, a man accustomed to rooms reorganizing themselves around his presence, suddenly confronted with someone who hadn't reorganized at all. The stillness in him was different from the stillness he usually carried. His usual stillness was control. This was something else, something that felt, strangely, like attention. Genuine, uncurated, the kind he hadn't felt pulled toward anything in longer than he wanted to calculate. She had already moved on, lifted the tray, adjusted her posture, stepped toward the far end of the table to reposition a second arrangement. Her back was straight. Her movements were efficient. She was simply doing her job, and the most dangerous man at the SEO estate had ceased to exist in her orbit the moment she looked away. He found that extraordinary. "Find out her name," he said quietly. Minjun's pause was brief but notable. "The staff member, sir." "Her name, before the evening ends." He resumed walking, and the corridor reformed around him as it always did, deference and attention and the careful choreography of people managing his proximity. But something had shifted in the interior geography of the evening. The 47 women in their silk gowns, the politician in the corner, his uncle's waiting conversation, all of it remained. He didn't abandon any of it. He simply also thought about the woman who hadn't bowed. Her name was Clarissa Adeyemi, and she had been working the CO estate for 11 hours by the time Jang Hyuk walked past her in the corridor. She had arrived at 9 that morning with the rest of the premium event staff contracted through the agency, 12 of them total, briefed in a back room by the estate's head coordinator, a tight-wound woman named Mrs. Park, who delivered instructions the way a general delivers battlefield orders. You do not speak to guests unless spoken to. You do not make sustained eye contact with principal attendees. You replace glassware within 30 seconds of it being set down empty. You are background. You are atmosphere. You are invisible. Clarissa had nodded along with everyone else, and then spent the next 11 hours doing her job well, which was what she always did, and thinking about the 3 other things she was managing simultaneously. The rent increase that had gone into effect last month, the university application form sitting half completed on her laptop at home, and the slow burn of having taken this particular job because the agency rate was double her usual rate, and she needed the money, not because she had any interest in being invisible at a gathering for people who spent more on table centerpieces than she earned in a month. She wasn't bitter about it. Bitterness required energy she preferred to spend elsewhere. She was practical about it, which was a different thing. What she was not was especially interested in the social architecture of the evening. She'd worked enough high-end events to understand the dynamics without being impressed by them. The performances of status, and the quiet violence of hierarchy, and the particular way wealth moved through a room, claiming space the way weather claims landscape. She had seen it enough times that it had become simply a backdrop to the work. Move efficiently, stay invisible, get through the evening, go home. She had been repositioning the champagne display near the east archway when she heard the shift in the room's atmosphere before she registered its cause. A subtle change in the quality of the air, the way sound altered when a significant presence entered a space, conversations quieting by half a register, movement becoming more deliberate. She had looked up out of reflex. A man in a charcoal suit, dark hair, something coiled in the tattoo at his neck, eyes that were moving across the room like they were reading it, cataloging everything, and finding most of it beneath further consideration. She had looked at him the way she looked at anything that entered her peripheral vision, briefly, registering, moving on. He was a guest, an important one, clearly, given the way the room reorganized itself around his arrival. She noted it, and then she returned to the glasses because the glasses were her actual concern. She did not know his name until later. She was in the estate kitchen at 9:30, restocking her tray, when another staff member, a young woman named Hiyori, who had been working CO events for 3 years and knew the guest registry by memory, leaned close and said, quietly, and with the weight of someone delivering significant information, "That man who stopped near you in the East Corridor? Do you know who that was?" Clarissa looked up. "The one in the dark suit?" Hiyori's eyes went slightly wide. "Jang Hyuk." She said the name the way you say the name of something large and dangerous, with respect for what it could do. He runs the Jang Syndicate, half of the Port Authority, 3 commercial districts, private security contracts with the government. He has never stopped walking at one of these events. Not once. Not for anyone. She paused. He stopped near you. Clarissa considered this for a moment. Then she picked up her tray. "I have 4 tables to cover before 10, she said. "Excuse me." Hiyori stared after her. Clarissa walked back out into the corridor and did her job, because the information that a powerful man had briefly noticed her existence was not something she had space in her evening to process. It was not a gift. It was not a story. It was something that happened, and then the evening continued, and she needed the champagne display near the south wall, refilled before the keynote started. She did not think about the way his eyes had moved across the room and then stilled on her. She did not think about how the stillness had felt different from the rest of him. She told herself she didn't, anyway. Minjun delivered the name at 9:47. Clarissa Adeyemi, 24 years old, Nigerian-British, currently residing in Seoul on a 2-year work visa, employed through a premium event staffing agency, 4 years of consistent high-performance reviews, preferred by 3 of the city's major event coordination firms. Prior to Seoul, London, where she had completed 2 years of a business management degree before withdrawing for reasons the file didn't specify. No criminal record, no known associations of note. Family in Lagos, mother, 2 younger brothers, sending money home monthly. Jang Hyuk read the single-page summary Minjun had compiled with the efficiency of a man accustomed to having information gathered quickly. He was in the estate's private anteroom, away from the main event, the sounds of the gathering muffled behind thick walls. He read it twice. Not because the information was complicated, because something about the accumulation of details, the withdrawn degree, the money sent home, the 4 years of consistent reviews, the 2-year visa, assembled themselves in his mind into the shape of a person with a weight to her life that had nothing to do with the CO estate or tonight's carefully curated social performance. She was not a player in this world. She was moving through it the way a river moves through terrain, indifferently, following her own course, unimpressed by the landscape. "You want surveillance continued?" Minjun asked, his tone professionally neutral. "Standard observation," Jang Hyuk said. "Nothing intrusive. I want to know her schedule." Minjun nodded once and said nothing further, because he had worked for Jang Hyuk for 6 years and had learned that the questions worth asking were very few. Jang Hyuk set the page down and looked at the far wall for a moment. The evening was nearly over. His uncle had been handled. The shipping contract conversations had been initiated. The politician in the corner had received the look that communicated clearly that their avoided conversation could not be avoided much longer. The event had functioned exactly as events like this were designed to function. And the only moment that had cost him any genuine thought had lasted less than 3 seconds and involved a woman arranging champagne glasses who had looked at him like he was simply a man. He thought about the angle of her chin, the way her posture had not changed when she looked away. Most people, when they looked away from him, did something, a small adjustment, a held breath releasing, a micro-expression of relief. She had simply redirected her attention, the way you look away from a window when you've finished looking out of it. Unremarkable. Complete. He could not remember the last time someone had looked away from him without it costing them something. He told himself it was interesting, that was all. A curiosity. A pattern break in a world that rarely surprised him anymore. He did not examine the other thing beneath that, the thing that felt less like intellectual curiosity and more like something he hadn't felt in long enough that he'd stopped expecting it. He picked up his phone. Let the evening complete itself. The next time he saw her was not an accident, though it was engineered carefully enough to appear like one. He knew she was contracted for a second event at the SEO estate 4 days later, a smaller afternoon gathering, 30 guests, a business luncheon for a group of regional investors. He had not arranged to attend. He arranged to attend. The excuse was legitimate enough that no one questioned it. A brief meeting with one of the investors who had been requesting his time for 6 weeks. 20 minutes, his calendar read, in and out. He arrived at noon and moved through the luncheon with the efficiency of a man with somewhere else to be, concluded the investor meeting in 18 minutes, and then took the long way back toward the exit. She was in the south corridor, restocking a drink station near the window. Afternoon light fell across the white of her apron at an angle that turned it warm. She had her back partially to him, reaching to adjust something on the upper shelf. And he was aware, with a clarity that irritated him slightly, that he had slowed his pace deliberately. He stopped entirely when she turned and found him standing 6 feet away. The expression on her face was not fear. It was not the particular kind of composed deference that powerful people elicited even from people trying not to show it. It was something more like mild recognition, as if she had placed him in her memory and was now simply confirming the placement. "You were here last week," she said. It was not quite a question. "I was." She nodded slightly, as if this confirmed something to herself, and returned her attention to the drink station. "Are you looking for something specific, or is there always a drink station in the south corridor?" She glanced at him sideways. "Only for afternoon events. The lighting is better here. People tend to linger." He found himself standing still in the south corridor of the SEO estate, making conversation about event logistics with a woman in a maid's uniform, and he was aware that this was not something he did. He had not made unscripted small talk in. He genuinely could not remember. Every conversation he entered was mapped before he arrived at it. Every exchange served a function. Words in his world were not spent on things that didn't matter. She seemed to understand that she was not being managed, and she responded to him the way she responded to everything, apparently, with directness and without theater. "You stopped walking last week," she said. Her voice was even, not accusatory. More like she was solving a small puzzle aloud and didn't particularly care whether he confirmed or denied. "In the east corridor." "I did." Most of the staff noticed. She set a glass down, straightened it. "People like you don't usually stop." People like me, he repeated. She looked at him directly. Important people, the kind that rooms get rearranged for. There was no judgment in it, no flattery either, just the clean accuracy of someone describing a thing they had observed. Usually they move through events like they're already somewhere else. And I seem different? You seemed like you saw something that surprised you? She tilted her head fractionally. That's unusual. He looked at her for a moment. What surprised me, he said carefully, was that you didn't bow. She held his gaze. I bow when I think it's appropriate. And it wasn't appropriate? You walked past me while I was working, she said simply. I wasn't one of the women lined up in the corridor. I had a job to do. A slight pause. I meant no disrespect. I know. She waited. That, he said, is what was surprising. Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile, not quite wariness, something more complicated than either. She studied him for a moment with the steady eyes that had stopped him in the first place, and he had the distinct and unfamiliar sensation of being actually looked at, rather than assessed, catalogued, or feared. Your drink station is fully stocked, he said after a moment. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly, gone before it fully arrived. It is. Then I'll leave you to it. He walked back toward the exit. Min-jun fell into step beside him without a word. Next event she's contracted for, Jang Hyuk said quietly. I'll find out, Min-jun said. Jang Hyuk said nothing else. But in the back of his mind, in the place where plans formed before he acknowledged them consciously, something had already begun to take shape, careful and quiet, and more dangerous than anything he'd permitted himself in years. Clarissa Adeyemi had a job to do, and no interest in performing for him, and he was going to keep finding reasons to be in the same room. The third encounter happened on his terms, but not in the way he had planned. He had arranged to attend a private dinner at the SEO estate, smaller this time, 14 guests, a curated evening that gave him legitimate cover. But when he arrived and moved through the rooms with the efficiency that had become his default mode of existing in social spaces, she wasn't there. Different staff, different agency rotation. He spent the evening doing what he always did, managing, calculating, performing the particular brand of controlled authority that kept his world functional, and noticed with a displeasure he refused to name properly that the evening felt exactly like every other evening had felt before 3 weeks ago. Flat, predictable, performed. He had Min-jun call the agency the following morning. What came back was her schedule for the next 2 months, her preferred shift patterns, and a detail that lodged itself in his mind with uncomfortable precision. She had declined 2 high-rate bookings at the SEO estate in the past year, citing scheduling conflicts that the agency's records suggested were not entirely conflicts. She simply hadn't wanted to work those particular events. She chose her bookings with a quiet selectivity that the agency tolerated because her performance reviews were exceptional, and experienced premium staff were difficult to replace. She chose. Even within constraints that left most people without choices, she chose. He found that more arresting than anything he had encountered in a boardroom or a negotiation, or a room full of people competing for his attention. He arranged a meeting with the estate's event coordinator directly. There was a private cultural exhibition being organized. 20 guests, intimate, the kind of gathering that required senior staff. He made a single suggestion, framed as a preference, delivered in the tone that made preferences indistinguishable from directives. When Clarissa arrived at the estate 3 weeks later and checked the staff roster, she found herself assigned to the main gallery room. She stood at the coordinator's desk for a moment after reading her assignment, and something in the way the coordinator didn't quite meet her eyes told her the assignment had not come from standard rotation. She thought about it on the drive over. She thought about the South Corridor and the conversation about drink stations, and the way he had said that is what was surprising with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing words the way surgeons choose instruments. She thought about the fact that she knew who he was now, had looked him up that same evening, reading the kind of information about the Jang syndicate that made sensible people recalibrate their proximity to anyone associated with it. She thought about all of that, and then she walked into the estate and did her job, because thinking about something and letting it change your behavior were two separate choices, and she had always been deliberate about which one she made. He arrived 40 minutes into the exhibition. She was near the far end of the gallery when she heard the room shift the way rooms shifted for him, and she kept her attention on the artwork she was maintaining, a traditional ink landscape, recently acquired, requiring the kind of careful positioning that justified her focus. She heard the footsteps slow, heard them stop. That piece was painted in 1887, he said, from approximately 4 feet behind her. The artist died before anyone recognized what he'd made. She turned. He was looking at the painting, not at her, his expression carrying something that might have been genuine appreciation if you knew how to read what genuine looked like on a face trained to reveal nothing. "Most significant things go unrecognized at first," she said. He looked at her then. "Is that a general observation?" "It's what I was thinking about the painting." The corner of his jaw moved slightly, the closest she had seen him come to a reaction that wasn't controlled. "You studied art?" "I studied people who valued things before the world caught up to them." She paused. Briefly, I didn't finish. "The degree," he said. "In London." The silence that followed had edges. She looked at him steadily. "You looked into me." "Yes." She had expected denial or deflection, or the smooth reframing that powerful people used to make surveillance sound like interest. The directness caught her in a way she didn't show and didn't examine until later. "Why?" "Because you did something no one does," he said, "and I wanted to understand it. I did my job. You looked at me like I was ordinary." He said it without self-pity or arrogance, with the same clean, factual quality she used herself. "I wanted to know what kind of person does that." She studied him for a moment, the controlled posture, the tattoo at his neck, the dark eyes that were, she had decided, not cold exactly, but careful. The eyes of someone who had learned to keep the distance between what he felt and what he showed very, very wide. "The kind of person," she said slowly, "who thinks that what a man does for a living doesn't change what he is when he's standing in front of a painting." Something moved through him. She saw it, barely, the way you see weather moving across water from a long distance, there and gone. "And what am I," he said, "when I'm standing in front of a painting?" She tilted her head slightly. Still figuring that out. She turned back to the artwork. He remained beside her for another 4 minutes. She counted without meaning to. And then he moved on into the gallery. But the distance he kept for the rest of the evening was not the distance of disinterest. It was the distance of someone being careful about something they were not ready to name. She felt it like a change in air pressure, and she told herself on the drive home that noticing it was not the same as being affected by it. She was beginning to understand that the distinction was becoming harder to maintain. Inside the syndicate's operations center on the 14th floor of a building in Mapo-gu, a conversation was happening that Jang Hyuk did not know about yet. His second-in-command, a man named Baek Sung-jin, who had been with the organization for 19 years and whose loyalty had always been to the institution more than to any individual leading it, sat across from 2 senior council members and spoke in the measured, careful tones of someone raising a concern that had been building for several weeks. The concern was this: Jang Hyuk was distracted, not visibly, not in any way that would register to an outsider. His performance at meetings was unchanged, his decisions still precise, his authority still unquestioned in every room he entered. But Baek Sung-jin had spent 19 years learning to read the spaces between Jang Hyuk's words, the micro-alterations in his focus, the way his attention distributed itself across a room. And something, in the past month, had begun drawing a portion of that attention somewhere it had never gone before. They had identified the staff member. They had done their own investigation, thorough and quiet, and found what Min-jun's file had found. An ordinary young woman with an ordinary life. No connections of significance, no leverage, no threat in any conventional sense. But Baek Sung-jin was not concerned about conventional threats. He was concerned about the unconventional ones. A man like Jang Hyuk was most vulnerable not to external force. They had systems for that. They had spent years building systems for that, but to internal erosion, to the slow dismantling of the particular emotional architecture that made him effective, the distance, the control, the ability to make decisions without the weight of personal attachment distorting the calculus. That architecture had held for 6 years. It had held through things that would have broken other men. And now, a woman in a maid's uniform who didn't know the rules of this world was walking through it without even trying to, and something in the structure was beginning to vibrate at a frequency Baek Sung-jin did not like. "She's a liability," he said to the 2 men across from him, "not because of who she is, because of what she's becoming to him." The council members listened. They did not disagree. "We handle it carefully," one of them said. "Carefully," Baek Sung-jin confirmed. "But we handle it." Clarissa knew something was wrong before she could identify what had changed. It started small, the way most significant things do. A feeling of being observed that went beyond the ordinary self-consciousness of someone who had recently become aware that a dangerous man was paying attention to her. This was different. This was the particular weight of surveillance that wasn't curious. It was evaluating. It felt the way a space feels before weather arrives. A pressure drop, a change in the quality of the air, the instinct that something large was moving in a direction that had consequences. She noticed the car parked near her building twice in 1 week. Different car the second time, but something about the positioning was the same. Too still, too deliberately unremarkable. She noticed a man near the entrance of the cafe she used most mornings, reading something on his phone with the focused inattention of someone trying to appear focused elsewhere. She was not paranoid. She had grown up in environments where reading rooms correctly was a useful skill, where the difference between what people showed and what they were doing had practical consequences. She was simply accurate. And what she was accurately reading told her that the attention Jang Hyuk had been paying her had created a secondary effect she had not accounted for. She sat with it for 2 days. She did not contact him. She had no way to contact him, which was its own clarifying detail, the reminder that whatever was building between them existed entirely within a structure that belonged to him, on terms that were his. She could be placed in rooms he was in. She could not place herself in his. On the 3rd day she found a card in her agency mailbox. No name, a number, 3 words beneath it, in clean printed text, "If you need." She stood in the agency's back office and looked at it for a long moment. Then she took out her phone. He answered on the 2nd ring. "There's someone watching my building," she said without preamble. A silence. Short, but the kind that contained a great deal of processing. "How long? A week? Maybe longer?" Another silence. Longer this time, with a different quality. Not calculation, she thought, but something closer to reckoning. "Are you somewhere safe right now?" "I'm at the agency." "Stay there." His voice was level, but the levelness had changed texture. It was the kind of control that costs something. "I'll send someone." "Jang Hyuk." She used his name deliberately, and she heard him register it, a small shift in the silence on the other end. "Did you know this would happen?" The pause before he answered was the most honest thing she had heard from him. "I knew it was possible," he said. "I thought I had more time." She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "More time for what?" "To deal with it before it reached you." She thought about what that meant. The implications of a man like him, in a world like his, saying it reached you instead of "I handled it." The confession buried in the phrasing, that he had been managing something she hadn't known to manage, that she had been in a kind of danger she hadn't consented to enter and hadn't been informed about. "We need to talk," she said. "Yes," he said, "we do." He came himself. She had half expected him to send Min-jun, or a car, or some other managed proxy that kept the appropriate distance between his world and the practical reality of what was happening. Instead, he walked into the agency's lobby 40 minutes later in a dark coat over a charcoal suit, Minjun a step behind him, and the two junior staff at the front desk went very still in the particular way that rooms went still for him. Clarissa was waiting near the back. She watched him move through the space and felt, beneath the complicated tangle of the moment, the thing she had been trying not to feel for several weeks. That his presence in a room changed the room in a way she had stopped pretending she was immune to. She led him to a small meeting room without being asked. He sat across from her. Minjun remained outside. She looked at him directly. "Tell me what's happening." He told her. Not everything. She understood, from the way he measured what he gave her, that there were layers to this she was being protected from as much as informed about. But enough. His organization had people who monitored his personal behavior as a form of risk management. He had drawn attention to her in a way that had triggered concern within his inner circle. The surveillance on her building was theirs, not external. They were assessing her, deciding whether she represented a manageable situation or one that required a more direct resolution. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "And what do they do," she said carefully, "with situations that aren't manageable?" He held her gaze. "They remove them." The words sat in the room like something physical. She absorbed it. She had known at some level, had known since Hyori whispered his name in the estate kitchen, and she had looked him up and read the shape of the world he operated in. That proximity to Jang Hyuk was not a neutral condition. She had told herself that understanding a thing was equivalent to being protected from it. She was understanding, sitting across from him in this small room with fluorescent lighting and chairs that didn't match, that she had been wrong. "So, what happens now?" she asked. "I handle it," he said. "You said that before." "This time I mean something different by it." He leaned forward slightly, and the quality of his stillness had changed. It was not the composed authority he carried in rooms full of people who feared him. It was something more stripped down, more costly. "I have to make a decision about my organization, about Bayek Sungjin and the council and what my response is to what they've done." He paused. "What they were prepared to do." "Without telling you." "Without telling me." She looked at him for a long moment. At the careful eyes and the tattoo and the hands on the table between them, one with a ring, the knuckles marked, the hands of someone who had built a dangerous world and managed it with precision for 6 years and was now sitting in a staffing agency meeting room because a woman who arranged champagne glasses hadn't bowed. "You could step back," she said quietly, "from whatever this is, between us. Make it simple for everyone." "I know. But you're not going to." He looked at her with the directness that had cost him something to develop, and was costing him something different now to use. "No." She held that, let the weight of it settle. "Why?" "Because," he said slowly, like a man examining something he hadn't fully looked at before finding the right words for it. "You are the first thing in 6 years that has felt like it belonged to me and not to the position, not to the name, not to what I'm supposed to be." He paused. "And I'm not willing to protect something that has never been real by destroying something that is." The fluorescent light hummed. Outside, Minjun's footsteps shifted. She thought about dignity and choices and the particular bravery of people who refused to perform what they didn't believe. She thought about everything she had told herself, that noticing him wasn't being affected, that understanding danger wasn't walking into it, that keeping her back straight and her gaze level was the same as keeping her heart out of reach. "If you do this," she said, "it's going to cost you." "Yes. And you've decided that already." "I decided it," he said quietly. "Somewhere around the 3rd time I arranged to be in a room where you were working." Something in her chest moved. Real, ungovernable. The kind of feeling that doesn't ask permission. She looked at him across the table and thought that this was the thing she had not accounted for. When she had stood in that corridor and refused to bow, not that he would stop walking, but that stopping would mean something, to both of them. "Then handle it," she said. "And when you have, come find me in an ordinary place, not an estate, not an event with marble floors and people performing." "Where?" She thought for a moment. "There's a cafe near Maple Bridge. They make terrible coffee and the chairs are uncomfortable." A pause. "I'll be there Saturday at 10. Something happened in his expression that she recognized, because she had been watching for it since the East Corridor. The thing beneath the control, the thing that was a man rather than a position. It was brief and real, and he didn't try to contain it. "Saturday at 10, he said. What happened inside the Jang syndicate in the following 72 hours was not something that made public record or conversation. It was the kind of reckoning that organizations like theirs conducted in the language of closed rooms and irrevocable decisions, the confrontation between a leader and the institution that had tried to act without him, the accounting of where loyalty ended and presumption began. Jang Hyuk walked into the operations center on the morning after he left the staffing agency and sat at the head of the table and looked at Baek Sung-jin and the two council members, and was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that reorganized power without a word being spoken. When he did speak, he was precise, and he was final. He told them that the decision about what constituted a threat to this organization belonged to him. That the decision about what he chose to protect was his. That a world built entirely on fear and hierarchy and the performance of dominance was a world that consumed itself from the inside, which was something he had watched happen to his father's version of the same empire and had spent 6 years preventing. But that prevention required him to be the kind of leader who made real decisions, not managed ones. He told them this was not a negotiation. Baek Sung-jin, who had served the Jang Syndicate for 19 years and was a man of considerable intelligence, looked at Jang Hyuk across the table and understood, perhaps for the first time, that the organization had not changed. The man at its head had. And those were different things, with different implications. The surveillance on Clarissa's building ended that afternoon. The council members did not leave the organization. But the shape of its authority shifted, subtly, tectonically, the way a foundation shifts after something has moved beneath it. Jang Hyuk remained who he was, precise, formidable, running a dangerous enterprise with the particular cold efficiency that had kept it functional and dominant. But the thing that had been closed in him, the interior mechanism that had kept everything at the same careful distance, had been renegotiated. Not broken, renegotiated. Power, he had decided, was not diminished by a man who knew what he valued. It was clarified. Saturday, 10 in the morning. A cafe near Mapo Bridge with terrible coffee and uncomfortable chairs and light coming through the window at a low winter angle. He arrived at 3 minutes past 10, which was deliberate, not to be late, but to walk in and find her already there, already having chosen her seat, already with coffee she had ordered herself, and a book open on the table that she closed when he came through the door without rushing to close it. She was in her own clothes. He had only seen her in uniform, and the distinction registered with him. The dark green of her sweater, the easy posture of someone not performing anything. She looked like herself, which was, he was realizing, the only version of any person he had ever found genuinely interesting. He sat across from her. The chair was, as promised, uncomfortable. He didn't adjust his posture. A waitress appeared. He ordered coffee. It arrived, and was, as advertised, not good. He drank it. "How's your coffee?" Clarissa asked, watching him. "Terrible," he said. "Mine too." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "Is it done?" "Yes." She nodded. "And you?" He understood what she was asking. Not about the organization, not about Baek Sung-jin or the council or the operational fallout of what he'd done. She was asking about him, the interior accounting. Whether the man who had sat across from her in that agency meeting room and said something real had survived the last 72 hours intact. "I'm still deciding some things," he said, which was honest in the way he had decided to be with her. Not completely open, not yet, but not managed either. But the decisions that mattered are made. She considered this. That's enough for now. Outside, the Han River moved past the bridge in its ancient, indifferent course, and the winter light fell across the table between them, in the particular way it falls in places that don't know they're significant. He looked at her across 2 bad cups of coffee and understood that this was the thing he had not allowed himself in 6 years of building an empire on control. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of it, which was its own kind of terrifying and its own kind of true. She had not bowed. She had not been afraid. She had not performed anything for him, not submission and not defiance, just the steady human fact of herself, meeting him where he was, asking him to be something other than the position. And he had stopped walking, and the world had reorganized itself, not around his authority, but around the simpler and more permanent fact of 2 people sitting in uncomfortable chairs in a cafe with terrible coffee, figuring out what came next. If you were captivated by Clarissa and Jang Hyuk's story, from the moment she refused to bow to the moment he couldn't look away, smash that like button and subscribe for more intense, unforgettable Mafia romance stories. Drop a comment and tell me which moment stayed with you the most. Was it the silent defiance, the tension between them, or the choice that changed everything? And tell me what story you want next. Should we dive into Jang Hyuk's darkest secret, or explore the dangerous rival who never accepted Clarissa? You decide. Thanks for being here, and remember, sometimes the most powerful move isn't dominance. It's the courage to stand unshaken. See you in the next story.